You this morning. Get to open the batting with Andrew Drysdale on the second day. So firstly, I'd like to thank Desert Channels and the Australian Rangeland Society for the opportunity and upfront acknowledge the First Nations people who have successfully managed our natural resources in Australia for 60,000 plus years. And I come from Turrbal and Yagara country at Moreton Bay. Not sure how Nicole's introduced this session because we actually don't see that, but yeah, my role is as CEO of NRM Regions Queensland, working with the 12 regional bodies across Queensland, which I'll describe in a minute. And I've been in this role for about 18 months, actually coincided with the start of COVID in Australia, but I'm not responsible for that. Previously worked in Victoria, running one of the catchment management authorities in Northern Victoria, and prior to that in the public service, so working in irrigated agriculture, salinity management, rural financial counselling and regional management. So I've got a fair bit of experience in what we're talking about today. I was asked to talk about partnerships at a national level, but I don't really have the right or responsibility to do that. I work at a state level. So I wanted to talk about the power of partnerships at every level, because in natural resource management, we need partnerships to be working at local, regional, state and national level. So I want to talk about it more in a broader sense. But I also want to talk about why NRM partnerships are critical, and hopefully leave you with some tools about how you might monitor those partnerships and track them over time and actually take them very seriously. So hopefully there's something that comes out of this talk that you'll be able to take back to your workplace. Like all presentations, it should start by letting you move the next slide. Try that one. We've got to start with the why. So Tony Hill sort of started this off a little bit earlier, his presentation, but why are partnerships in NRM important? Because we have a shared dilemma. And one might say it's actually a crisis. And I really fear still that the general community and the pollies don't really believe that we have a crisis. You go outside today in Brisbane or near Brisbane where I'm living, beautiful climate, trees, plants, animals. So the environment's going well, but there's a lot of evidence that we're going far from well. And so the evidence isn't supporting that. The Earth is currently experiencing a sixth major extinction event in the history of life on this planet. More than 36% of the world's 47,000 assessed species are threatened with extinction. That's a third of species facing extinction. In a little more than 2 centuries of industrial settlement in Australia, we've contributed to the extinction of some 115 of native animals and plants. 60% of coral reefs globally could be lost by 2050 or even earlier through overfishing, pollution, invasive species and coral bleaching due to climate change. If you just focus on Queensland, ground cover and grazing lands across Queensland has declined in 2019 to 57% compared to a long-term mean of 64%. There is lots of exposed soils in Queensland. This degradation in Queensland is costing us about $2 billion a year in lost agricultural production, infrastructure damage, and reduced environmental services, which I'll touch on in a minute. We now have successive dry seasons are continuing. Is it time to say that drought is now a part of our normal farming life? And I know that Neil Cliff touched on that yesterday a little bit. And overarching, I guess our footprint in Australia is enormous. It's very large. Our footprint is nearly 3.5 times what nature can actually regenerate. So we simply are consuming more natural resources than we can regenerate. So it is really timely to respond now, but there are great opportunities in that too. It's not all one negative story, there's great opportunities. One of the great ways to respond is being involved in natural resource management. But what do we mean by natural resource management? It has many definitions. So this is my definition. The NRM is about how we influence the management of our land, waterways, native animals and plants to ensure we have clean air, fresh water, productive soils, carbon sequestration and pollination services to underpin our quality of life now and for future generations. And Mike Berwick talked about this a little bit yesterday, and he referred to those things as ecosystem services, which is a common word. What I wanted to flag in this definition is, in terms of what our responsibility is, it's about how we influence the management. The actual management is done by many of the people on here today, the farmers and the public land managers. Regional bodies that I work with, our job is to influence that management. So hopefully that resonates with you. And incidentally, we have just embarked on a first ever statewide review of what NRM means. So we're doing some market research where we're asking the questions of pollies, senior bureaucrats, peak bodies, tourism, property developers, right down to farmers that are involved in NRM and those that aren't involved in NRM, and asking the questions around their understanding of NRM and how they actually want to get information around NRM. So it's the first time we've done it in Queensland. So it would be a great presentation. Hopefully we can give you in the future once that work's finished. So these Queensland regional NRM bodies, hopefully most people are familiar with them. There's 12 of them, including the Torres Strait Regional Authority at the top there, and obviously aware of Desert Channels given the work that they've done in running this conference. So the model in Queensland was formalised in the late 1990s, and Andrew Drysdale, that follows me, is one of those key architects involved with the setting up of the whole program. And in Queensland, we all operate as non-for-profit community-based organisations, all with local skills boards. And there's 54 similar organisations across all of Australia that operate under different governance arrangements depending on which state they actually come from. But they're all ultimately doing the same thing on the ground. So it's a pretty strong sector that we're involved with across the whole nation. But there's obviously other players in NRM. We're not the only ones by any stretch of the imagination, and that's why the conversation today about partnerships is so critical. So what I wanted to do here, I guess, was just summarise the activities, the major activities that our regional NRM bodies do in Queensland that rely on local, state, regional and national partnerships, and highlight which activities rely on those sort of partnerships. And not surprisingly, all of them do. So what I wanted to focus on just for a minute here is about the regional NRM planning process. So hopefully people are familiar with their regional NRM plans. So they are produced by all the regional bodies across Australia. They're produced every 5 or 6 years, and they're a compilation of local NRM priorities picked up through local communities and married with the state and federal government directions. And they rely enormously on partnerships because they're not the regional body's plan. The regional body has the responsibility to produce the plan on behalf of their local communities. So in the context of what Queensland's been doing, these regional plans are nearly at the end of a 5 or 6 year cycle. So they've been going through a renew cycle at the moment and been very actively out there engaging. And there's some 1,200 partner organisations been involved across the state in the development of these plans. So really highlighting again the importance of really strong partnerships. However, this planning process is only one example of a partnership process or a partnership approach. So I wanted to just quickly take you through simple examples of the types of partnerships that we're involved with, and many of these will resonate with you guys in your roles. So I guess we start with the very formal types of partnerships. So legal grant agreements, grant deeds. They are, as I say, legal in nature, very prescriptive in defining roles and responsibilities of all the parties involved. And they're usually associated with the transfer of funds, and public funds often, to carry out activities and produce products and services. So they're probably at the top level of formality. I guess then you come into the next level down where it's still formal, but don't normally have a legal status behind them. So a memorandum of understandings are quite common, and there's 2 there that we're heavily involved with local government and the Queensland Water and Land Carers. But also I'll put there the Rangelands Declaration, which we produced in late 2019 for this region. So a document that's trying to aspire to drive some partnerships for actions, but not necessarily legal in its status. But these often also have definitions of how conflicts are resolved, because conflicts happen in partnerships. They all have common clear visions. They define roles and responsibilities. And the successful ones, especially MAUs, should always have an action plan and a clear review timeline associated with them. And then there's the third type of partnership agreement, and one would argue probably the most important of all, and that is the handshake, the nod or the wink. And it's often seen as the strongest personal commitment by all the parties involved. This partnership is obviously totally values-based and based on personal relationships underpinned by trust. In an Australian way, the handshake is often seen as the most binding of all arrangements or all partnerships. They need the most work often, but they're also the most rewarding. So given that spread of types of partnerships that we're involved in, what makes them successful? I want to engage with you guys now for a few minutes. I want you all to think for a minute. Grab a piece of paper, because I know that you've got one in front of you because you're taking copious notes. Grab a pen, take a few seconds, and I want you to write down one word that you think is critical for a successful partnership. And then I'm going to ask you to hold that word up so I can see what people have got. So I'm going to give you a second. One word that you think is the most critical for a successful partnership. Some people are taking longer than others. That's all right. Okay. Can you hold your word up to the camera? And let me see. What have we got here? We've got funding. Someone's written funding. Yeah. Not always necessary, but funding's obviously, for more formal ones, very critical. Relationships. Yep. A partnership's normally between more than one person. Trust. We touched on trust. Trust is really critically important. There's a couple there that I think are talking about different types of partnerships that maybe I don't read out today. Time. Time's a really good one. Time, it takes a lot of commitment. And talking is another great one. So thanks everyone for that. From my experience and inputs from a range of other people I've been involved with for a number of years. Someone had a history too. Great comment. History. Yeah, good comment on history. We came up with eight partnership principles that underpin successful partnerships, and these are on this slide here. So we come up with mutual benefits, collaboration, good governance, acknowledgement and respect, roles and responsibility, differences, commitment, and communication. And really, for those partnerships to operate, all parties work together around those principles. So in terms of mutual benefits, we mean that all parties will benefit from their dealings with each other. In terms of collaboration, we're talking about the management of natural resources is delivered cooperatively. That is, cooperation is used instead of competition. Often we use the little mantra, partners don't compete. And a good example for us in recent times with that was the work that we did with the Queensland Farmers Federation with the rollout of the second round of the Land Restoration Fund, where the department offered both QFF and my organisation 50K each and almost put us in competition to see who could deliver the best product. We actually came together and formed a partnership and went back to the department and said, how about you double that? Give us 200,000 and we'll work together and we'll come out with an extension program to help the rollout. And so for me, that was a really clear example of that partnership gave a lot better outcome for everyone through working together. The third one there is good governance. So we make decisions together and we manage processes well. Fourth one's really important, acknowledgement and respect. We recognise and advocate for our partners. That is really important. And we do that through lots of ways. You might do that publicly. You might do it in the political arena. Clearly, you do it at events. And I really like doing it in documents. I think including logos on documents is a real acknowledgement of how people are working together. I love having lots of logos on documents. Roles and responsibilities. Our boundaries are clear and understood by each other and our respective members. Differences. We identify and resolve our differences early and in-house. Commitments about having a shared long-term vision for what we're trying to achieve together. And communication, probably the most important, but it's open, honest, ongoing, and it's a fit-for-purpose communication approach. So I think they covered off with most of the things that people wrote down themselves. So I've also got a question here in the chat room that I think is a really great question, which is about how do you measure the effectiveness of partnership principles, as they all sound sort of values-based. So how do you quantify that, whether they're effective or not? So I'm glad you've asked that question. It's a great question. And we've done a bit of work on this and we've developed a thing which hopefully some people might be familiar with, others maybe not, which is called a goal attainment scale. And this is a methodology used to quantify and measure trends in things that are traditionally quality-based rather than data-based, and perfect to measure the success otherwise of partnerships. How it works is by putting a description, which is actually defined by the players themselves. So the partners themselves come together and put a description, which is the black text in the middle of the table here, along with a numeric value, which is the blue value down the side, number of stars, around a range of behaviours from highly desirable to favourable to less than expected, against all the 8 partnership principles, which are the green writing across the top. So we've got a scoring mechanism down the side, we've got the partnership principles across the top, and then we've got behaviours described for each of those areas from highly desirable to least desirable. A lot of information here, and I'm not unashamedly putting that up there because I think it does highlight how those descriptions are really important to use this methodology. So if you look at the collaboration column as an example, so that's the second column in from your left. So what it's saying is that an individual partner in the partnership has 5 potential scores against collaboration in this partnership. So they could give it 5 stars if it's the most favourable expected outcome for them. And it means that parties have proactively provided contribution and ideas for each other to secure funds, information and opportunities. If they scored it at 4 stars, it's more than they expected. Parties sometimes provide contributions and ideas from each other to secure funds, information and opportunities. 3 is as expected. Parties do not actively consider the issues of collaboration and competition. So this group was probably a bit harsh in the way they defined that. 2 stars, though, less than expected. Parties sometimes compete for funds and resources. And 1 star, the least favourable outcome you're seeking or behaviour. Parties actually compete vigorously for funds and resources. So I hope you see how this framework starts to come together. Once you have that, then the players in the partnerships can score how effective they feel about the partnership and how it's performing against those principles. This is normally done on an annual basis, but can be done at any time interval you desire. And it's normally done through a confidential voting process, or you can use a whiteboard or any other approach. It just depends on the maturity of the relationships, I guess, between all the partners. So in this example here, we've got 13 partner agencies or partner organisations involved in this bit of work. And they've all confidentially scored the performance against each of the principles based on their expectations, which is why the 13 ticks are in each of the columns. So using the collaboration example again, you can see there that 2 people have scored it as 5 stars. It's given them the most favourable expectation for them. 10 scored it 4 stars and 1 person scored it 2 stars, indicating that it's less than expected, the outcome of working in this partnership. So what's the benefit of using this goal attainment scaling approach? Firstly, it shows the level of importance that the players are placing on the partnership by actually being committed to measuring its performance and defining the expectations of each other. Secondly, it drives open conversations, bringing the unsaid issues to the surface to be resolved rather than just sitting there in the background. So, for example, clearly the one partner here thinking that under collaboration that there is some competition for funds going on in the partnership because they've only scored it a 2. So it brings that to the surface. And thirdly, it focuses on what is right, not who is right, and allows everyone to have their say and influence in the partnership, not just the loud ones. So it's a great methodology. It also allows you to collect data and measure over time. So here's a bit of data where we've been collecting over a 6 measurement period. So each of those colours are periods between 2011 and 2012. Across the scores of the 5 stars to the 1 star, if you like, the most favourable to least favourable. And it shows how that partnership feels it is performing. It draws out the conversations again because you can talk about why is there variation and then why is there trend changes over time. So it really brings that conversation to the fore. So I guess in conclusion, the goal attainment scale is a very powerful evaluation tool to ensure partnerships are on track and everyone is part of the journey. So I guess out of my talk, hopefully you got something out of that in terms of how you might be able to use a tool like this for some of your work. Certainly, I think it's been a really critical use for the experiences I've been involved in. So I'd like to pass over now to Andrew and to talk about his, and I'll just leave you with my last little slide because it's a slide I love to use. Great Australian natural asset, but I think we're doing questions at the end rather than at the moment. So I'll finish up there. Thanks very much.